Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be hard for us to top that one and that level of energy, but we're going to sure do our best. I'm Jesse Stopnitsky with Performance Brokerage Services. We are North America's highest volume dealership brokerage firm that specializes in automotive buy-sell activity. Thank you very much for joining us, for being here with us today. It has already been an exceptional NAMAD conference, and today's session is sure to be highly informative, providing you with takeaways and actionable steps that you can apply to your business if you're considering a future sale or an acquisition. So the theme of today's session is one of my favorite quotes: luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Our goal is to hopefully empower you today so that when the opportunity knocks on your door, you will have the tools necessary to capitalize on it. On stage, we have some of our firm's top producing advisors here to provide you with relevant, real-time, and practical data directly from the trenches of the buy-sell market. Starting with George Chaconis here, Senior Partner for our Southeast office. Many of you likely know George, as he's been a longtime supporter of NAMAD, regularly attending the conferences. George is a highly experienced M&A advisor, and he has been with our firm for over 20 years. Next, we have Paul Keckney. He is the Senior Partner for our Texas and Midwest offices. Paul is a seasoned veteran in the automotive industry with over 30 years in retail, including as a dealer for General Motors and Ford. Paul then became a national leading 20 group moderator for both NADA and NCM. Matt Willis here is a partner at a Midwest office. Matt spent over 20 years managing his family's prominent automotive dealership group in the Midwest, and Matt leverages his unique experiences having been on both sides as a dealer and a broker. We have Jamie Farley. Jamie is the head of business development for our Texas and Midwest offices. Jamie enjoys a distinguished 25-year career at Toyota as a market representation manager for both Toyota and Lexus. Jamie is also the founder and visionary and the host of the podcast Get in Her Lane, where she champions inclusion and diversity in the automotive industry and elevates the narratives of women in the sector. We certainly have your esteemed NAMAD members who are joining us here in the front, Mr. Malcolm Cunningham and Vikas Mahandru. They'll be joining us about halfway through the session. Malcolm started his professional career in 1990 selling automobiles in Atlanta. In 2003, he was given the ultimate opportunity and the ultimate position of general manager, where he managed over $30 million in assets for Group 1 Automotive and grew his operation to over $60 million in sales annually. He endured one of his lifelong dreams on November 17, 2005, when he purchased his first dealership, one of the oldest and largest Ford dealerships in Atlanta. Malcolm is the president and CEO of Malcolm Cunningham Companies, which includes Malcolm Cunningham Chevrolet in Atlanta and Malcolm Cunningham Chevrolet in Augusta, Georgia. And last but certainly not least, we have Vikas Mahandru of Aaron Automotive Group. Vikas brings more than 20 years of experience in the automotive industry. He acquired his first dealership only in December of 2021. And in less than 3 years has since grown it to 5 additional dealerships, totaling 6 dealerships in Southern California. He grew his dealership group from $45 million in sales and approximately 50 employees to approximately now $300 million in sales and over 350 employees. Vikas earned Ford Motor Company's prestigious President's Award for his work at his flagship dealership, Aaron Ford of Poway, and his innovative approach to fixed operations has landed him a seat on Ford's Dealer Advisory Board. So please, with a gracious round of applause, please welcome our guests. Thank you. We are jumping into the material, and we have to, of course, start with a quick introduction on Performance Brokerage Services. 30 years ago, our founder, who happens to be my father, we are a family company, had a vision to build a reputable M&A firm governed by an unwavering commitment to honesty and integrity. Now, with second-generation family ownership at the helm, these values run deep throughout our firm. More importantly, they are the foundation and the reason for our success. Our value statement, which has governed us in business for over 30 years, is as follows: befriend your client, Lead your client with your expertise. Put your client's interests ahead of your own. Under all circumstances, do the right thing, and the business will follow. Our firm operates out of 10 offices across the United States and Canada, offering clients national exposure with local representation. Our team is comprised of M&A advisors, former dealers, manufacturer representatives, 20 group moderators, CPAs, and other industry professionals, all who are committed to our firm's value statement. As such, our exceptional team has afforded us the privilege of being North America's highest volume dealership brokerage firm, consummating well over 900 transactions. You can certainly see here the uptick in buy-sell activity through the pandemic and through the COVID years, though as a firm we are pacing similar volume in 2024 as well. We are proud to work with many of the industry's largest national dealership groups, but even more importantly, we are immensely proud of our involvement with NAMAD members over the years, having assisted countless NAMAD members with their buy-sell needs. Whether it's helping managers turn their dreams of becoming a dealer into a reality, or assisting dealers who are on the sunset of their careers through the complex sale process towards a well-deserved retirement. Our agenda for today's session will touch briefly on the state of the buy-sell market. We'll look at preparing for a sale. We'll talk about OEM approval, dive into valuations post-COVID, and talk about preparing for a purchase. This is our team. Thank you again for joining us. We are going to jump into our questions. And Paul, I'm going to start off with you here.
We'll see if this works. Okay.
Check 1, 2. All right. Paul, it's certainly been an interesting few years through the pandemic with fluctuations in profitability, valuations, buy-sell activity. Tell us about the current state of the buy-sell market.
Well, if we look at last year out of the Texas Midwest office, we sold 32 stores or were involved in 32 transactions. This year we're heading towards 40, so certainly still a very busy market. Obviously, goodwill numbers are down, but I would also say that sellers who are ready to get out and truly at that point where they're ready to retire, do something with that asset, divest of it. If they're willing to take what the current market value is, we absolutely have a ton of buyers out there, and the store will sell. So the market is still quite strong. Goodwill is down a little bit.
So goodwill is down slightly. Not surprising if we look at the driving factors that influence the buy-sell market. First and foremost, of course, being dealership profitability. I just saw an article this week, yesterday I think it was, in the Automotive News that through the first 6 months of 2024, the average dealership's profit was down 33%. Plus, we have higher interest rates for business loans and acquisitions. We have an increase in acquisition opportunities coming to market, more sellers coming to market. Therefore, greater buyer selectivity, naturally, and an overall level of uncertainty in the retail environment, the economy, politically. So again, not surprising that we're seeing goodwill values softening, but as you stated, we are still on track for potentially one of our best years on record, which speaks to the continued pace of consolidation in the automotive industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. George, I apologize for blocking you here. George, I saw recently an article that said approximately 40% of the transactions consummated in 2023 were in the South. That is a staggering percentage. George, senior partner for our Southeast office, what are you seeing in the South that perhaps is unique?
Thank you, Jesse. What we're seeing is the migration of people coming to the Southeast, predominantly the great state of Florida, where I live and work out of Tampa. There's been a huge influx of demand for dealerships in the Southeast because of the growth, low or no taxes like here in Florida, the continued profitability of stores in the Southeast. Right now, I've got more mandates to help buyers buy stores from Canada, Northeast, the Midwest to come to the Southeast. We're continuing growing out our partnerships in the Southeast with other deal makers to really continue to grow our business there.
I would say, laddering off what you said, you have demand for the Southeast, but it's coming from Southeast regional dealers, people wanting to come into Florida, the Northeast, even Canadian dealers coming down, and that's putting additional pressure on the Southeast market?
Correct. And look, I've been promoting dealers to buy stores, especially in Florida, for years, but nobody would listen to me because we are in the great state of Florida, and it's just the growth. And there's so many benefits of being a dealer in Florida and in the Southeast. I mean, we're selling stores throughout the Carolinas, Georgia, we like Tennessee. Even now, we're venturing more deals in Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and Louisiana. So continue to grow.
I appreciate it, George. Thank you. Let's shift to, because we're going to keep moving through the material, let's shift to preparing for a sale. Jamie and Matt, this next one's for you. If I am considering a sale of my business, whether it's immediately or in the next 3 to 5 years, let's say, what tangible steps can I take to prepare, to protect my business, my family, and to maximize my goals?
Well, Jesse, thanks for the question. It's a very good one, and it's one we get asked quite a bit. Our goal as your broker is definitely to get the most out of your asset, and in order to do that, we feel like there's some steps that need to take place in order to get that. We have 7 steps that we really focus on, and one kind of hit home for me here today is just making sure you're prepared. You talked with your family. They're ready for this. There's no family members that are ready to jump right in. Certainly, we would ask for that step to take place before you come to us and start talking about preparing for a sale. So that's step 0, really. Step 1 would be making sure we get all of our inventories really well organized. New car inventory, we certainly don't want to have way too much. A day's supply significantly over the average. Used cars, we shouldn't have overaged inventory going into a prepared sale. Otherwise, that's certainly going to hurt. And lastly, parts inventory. You definitely want to get with your accountant and make sure that you've depreciated all those assets properly and get your parts inventory in order. Next would be FF&E. Make sure furniture, fixtures, and equipment are all in tip-top shape, and also have those well documented ahead of time. Many times in a transaction with FF&E, that might be a set number, and in other times it's a negotiated price on on FF&E. And in those cases, it would be nice for everything to be set up and have it properly scheduled so that you can price those accurately.
Matt, if I may interject just for a moment on the FF&E, something that we're seeing that's unique in recent years, of course, is many dealers taking advantage of the Section 179 allowance, bonus depreciation, accelerated depreciation. We can no longer use book value of assets as a methodology for valuing the assets, given so many assets that may be booked down to 0 that were expensed as opposed to being capitalized. So very poignant information right now on different ways to value those assets, especially given the current environment and the tax allowances over recent years.
Very good. And number 3 would be real estate, making sure that you have your real estate in tip-top shape. A recent appraisal is definitely something that you should have. If we're working off of an appraisal from 4 or 5 years ago, that's definitely changed. And so if you're preparing for a sale, I'd get that ahead of time and be ready with it. OEM compliance, as far as your facility goes, the more OEM compliant it is, the more valuable the store is. So there's not significant investment needed up front. Financials being organized and definitely accurate. We have buyers that are constantly asking questions on financials, and so the more organized and precise we can have those up front, the better, and definitely gives confidence to the buyer. CSI, the number of times we hear buyers asking, okay, what's the store? After they've signed an NDA. Next, they're going right to Google reviews, Yelp reviews, wanting to see how is the customer's perception of this store in the community. And so extremely important to work that high number and make sure that you're high on the reviews. Operational efficiencies, we get asked this a lot. Is this a turnkey operation that I'm buying, or is it a start from scratch operation? And with having good processes and procedures in place, ideally a buyer would be going in with a turnkey operation. And in that case, you need to have good processes and procedures. And lastly, but it's probably number 1, is assembling the right team to go to market with. So making sure you have a broker that's going to help you along the way. Although we are brokers, and so I'm selling on this, having a broker involved definitely handholds the process and definitely helps you throughout the process. Having a good bank relationship, highly important, as you all know, having a great CPA involved, and then attorneys are very heavily involved throughout these processes, and so you need to have a very strong attorney that can help you get this from start to finish in a quick manner. So we call it landing the plane, and if you can have an attorney that helps us get that plane landed, it's certainly helpful.
Terrific. Terrific. Yes, Paul,
One
please.
comment on real estate. When you're getting an appraisal, I think for a seller, it's really important that they use a national firm that's MAI certified, that is going to have good comparables. I've looked at many appraisals over the years that's been done by somebody local in a small town. They don't have good comparables, and it really becomes not relevant.
Another point of contention in the deal negotiations, and typically the real estate can be something that's negotiated further in advance down the sales cycle that can create friction and cause problems as you're already deeper into the transaction. Certainly. Excellent comments, Paul. Jamie, anything to add?
Matt had a lot of great suggestions, so I'm just going to add a couple more. Going back to parts, don't overlook this. Run a list, find out what is aged. Even better, do a physical inventory. Get a value on it. Also find out what is obsolete. Use your OEM return allowance for those obsolete parts. For everything else, find a way to try to sell them to a third party or offload them in some way just to clean up that inventory. Long-term contracts can also sometimes be a sticking point, so definitely get a hold of all of those agreements so you know the length and the terms of those, review them. If you feel like anything could be an issue, get ahead of it. Maybe try to renegotiate those in advance. That just makes things go for a smoother process overall.
Or move it month to month if you can bring the contracts month to month.
Yep, great suggestion. If you have any in-house products like oil changes for life or prepaid maintenance, a buyer's going to want to understand that, so make sure you have those details ready. And if you have a union store or shop, same thing, buyers are really going to want to understand that structure, so make sure you have that available for them as well. And I know Matt mentioned financial statements, having those in order. The accuracy is important there, but also having in order your entity governance documents. So things such as your LLC operating agreement, bylaws if it's a corporation, any resolutions, making sure they're up to date and well organized. Obviously, that's going to help speed things up if you have all that in order. And of course, it's also necessary for a buyer to know that they're buying the correct assets from the proper entity.
Spot on. We are getting into the weeds, and I love it. Paul.
One thing as a former 20 group moderator that we focused on in 20 groups, and if you're in a 20 group, you already know this, but really make sure that you have a process for who's signing those long-term contracts, number one, and I think that's probably a good takeaway today. And then number two, make sure you're looking at those contracts on a regular basis, whether you're selling your store or not, because a lot of these contracts auto-renew, and I can't tell you how many times as a broker we've gone and pulled all these contracts and had some that renewed 3 months before we took it to market, and it can be a bit of a disaster.
For 5-year terms. Yep, absolutely. Remember that a long-term contract is a liability to the buyer, especially DMS contracts, and if the buyer doesn't want to assume those, once again, that can create conflict. It can create friction, and we're certainly in the weeds here talking about preparing for a sale. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning, we talk about maximizing the value. Simply by eliminating the friction and making your business more marketable, you're expanding the buyer pool, which is naturally going to have an influence on value as well. Buyers want to engage in seamless transactions that have a level of certainty for a closing. So the steps, the tangible, walkaway, actionable steps from Jamie and Matt are exceptional. And remember that all of these things, while benefiting you, will also help to maximize the value and increase the marketability of your assets. Terrific. Jamie, I have to come to you for OEM approval. 25 years with Toyota and Lexus. All right, from an OEM's perspective, what are they looking for in a candidate? What can I, as a candidate, do to increase the likelihood of being approved by the OEM?
Yes, and I am absolutely happy to answer this question. I handled it for 9 years on the Toyota side and 2 years on the Lexus side. So I was the person scrutinizing all over the application. So absolutely happy to lend my advice here. So OEMs are looking for dealer candidates with proven operational experience and proven performance. So any dealer candidate that they're evaluating, they want to see that the stores that they own are meeting all the minimum performance requirements in capital, in sales, in CSI. If you happen to be a first-time buyer and you don't own obviously you don't own your store yet, and this is your first opportunity, then they want to see that you've held the role of general manager or executive manager, where they've truly been leading the store and the store is performing under their leadership and meeting all of those minimum performance requirements. And then how do they measure that? Well, there's a scorecard, of course, and there's the dealership financial statements. So the scorecard is the dealership or the OEM reports. So it's important to make sure that you are keeping these because they want to see 2 to 3 years of this documentation, so the OEM reports and the financial statements. And specifically, they're looking for sales effectiveness. Is it at least 90%? For some OEMs, they want it to be at least 100%. Is CSI at region or zone average or above? Some OEMs are moving to a customer retention score versus a CSI score. Is a dealership profitable? Is a dealership meeting its net working capital requirements? So those are all the things that have to be yeses for approval. Of course, there is a dealer application that the candidate needs to fill out. Once they do so, this authorizes the OEM to run a background check. So that usually consists of a criminal check, a credit check, and for some OEMs, a social media check, since they are looking into the character of the person for sure. Yes. And then for first-time buyers, of course, if there's NADA Academy or NCM training, not necessarily a requirement, but definitely a bonus to have that training on the application. And then from a capital perspective, making sure that the candidate has a portion of unencumbered capital that's truly free and clear, that does not need to be repaid. So some of it can be borrowed, and the OEMs are going to differ a little bit on how much for debt to equity. But for that unencumbered capital, there will be a pretty significant source of funds review that the OEM's going to do. For the borrowed capital, similar, they're going to be looking at all the term sheets. If you're taking out a real estate loan, for floor plan, for capital loans, so they're going to be looking over all of that. The buyer candidate also has to have a pro forma that they're going to fill out with their application to make sure it meets the debt to equity requirements and the minimum net working capital requirements that the OEM is expecting. And so that will all go through a review. And then finally, the ownership structure. Those entity governance documents needs to clearly lay out who has control, so i.e. who has the controlling interest as a dealer principal. If there are any other partners or investors involved, typically they will need to also fill out a dealer application and provide the source of funds necessary for the review. So when all of that is compiled, it goes to the OEM for review. That's when the OEM asks a lot of questions, so just be prepared that that's part of the process. And then after that review, it typically goes to another level before it eventually routes to executives for final approval.
Jamie, thank you. I love the advice for managers that are aspiring to be dealers to gather their CSI scores, SSI, planning volume, sales effectiveness, et cetera, in advance while still on the job and having the opportunity to have those scores to present and submit for the application. Staying on OEM approval to an extent, George, we hear about various minority programs being offered by the OEMs. They all have different unique parameters, criteria, and benefits. If I qualify, well, I don't qualify. If you qualify as a minority candidate, do you recommend exploring these programs? And if so, how would a candidate go about doing so?
Well, absolutely. I suggest that you explore the different programs, which change all the time. But having helped Malcolm buy a Chevrolet store in Augusta and other minorities buy and sell dealerships, I understand the process. The key, though, I think, firstly, is there any OEMs out in the audience that a buyer would want to meet and develop a relationship? I don't see any hands up. There's one.
There's one.
So see the hands that are up. Those are the people you have to develop a relationship with. This is still a relationship business. Everything that Jamie said is absolutely necessary to become a dealer, but it's all about building a relationship, going to the one-on-ones, continually staying in front of the OEMs and their minorities programs that are ever changing. But I would highly encourage that this week is a great time to network and meet the OEM representatives.
Absolutely. Thank you, George. At this,
I would just second that, because before joining Performance, and like you mentioned, Jesse, my career with Toyota, this is probably my 10th or 11th NAMAD that I've been to. So I would come down every year representing Toyota and really hungry to meet interested candidates and form that relationship. So that was really, really important.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, George. Excellent advice. At this moment, we'd like to bring up your esteemed NAMAD members, Mr. Malcolm Cunningham, Mr. Vikas Mahandru. If you would, please, one more time, round of applause for Jamie Farley and George Chaconas, and please welcome Vikas and Malcolm. Ready? Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Sure. Yeah. See better. You gentlemen are front and center.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Vikas. Gentlemen, Malcolm, Vikas, please, a quick introduction. Anything you'd like to share? Perhaps your experience working with Performance, if you don't mind. Sure. But please, an introduction for the crowd.
Good afternoon, my car family. I am Vikas Mahandru, originally from India. I came here 24 years ago. Used to make sandwiches at a Subway for about a year and a half. And when one of my family friends said, you should sell cars, I said, I don't know anything about cars. He's like, it's not about cars, it's about people. I was like, sure, I'll try. So I went to a Nissan store. It was an old school interview. They made me wait 4 hours on purpose to see how badly I wanted the job. So I wanted the job, so I got the job. So that was my first job, 8 years, working at a Nissan store. I became a finance manager within 9 months of doing that. Became a sales manager, general sales manager at the same store. Then 2008 happened, took a year off, came back. So I've worked with Nissan, Infiniti, Toyota, and then I became FCA, golden child, I guess. So we took over Russell, Westbrook, CDJR, and Van Nuys. That was 180th in the country when we took over. Not a good store, but great opportunity. My peers, my owners gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do. We took the store within 15 to 18 months to top 5 in the country. It still is top 5 in the country. That's kind of like my Super Bowl moment. I was the coach of that team. So that's kind of my journey. And then Aaron, who's our son, 4.5, was born, and me and Kriti, my wife, decided that we wanted to take a leap of faith and we wanted to do something for ourselves. So that's when I resigned from a job where everybody other than my wife called me crazy. It was as good as it comes. It was probably top 1% job in the country. No issues at all, making good money, full autonomy. But again, if there is one advice I want to share with everybody in the room is you got to take a chance on yourself. Nobody can tell you to do it. You have to pull the trigger. So, me and my wife, Kriti, took a chance. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a deal lined up. I walked away from a very, very good job, sat home for 10 months, started calling dealers, cold calls, and Jesse and Jason happened to be one of those calls. And I was pre-qualified by a lot of those brokers. Okay, how many stores do you own? How much money do you have? We'll call you back, and you never hear back. Jason and Jesse took 45 minutes on the first call, and that changed our life. So thank you, Jesse, and Jason is not here, but I'm sure he's going to see this recording. So thank you, Jason, for changing my life, changing our life, and helping us, in creating our legacies. So I'm honored to be a part of this elite group here, and I just want to share my story. And even if we make an impact on any one of you, and you actually pull the trigger and take a chance on yourself, it will be a big win. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Cunningham. I'm from Atlanta. I currently have 2 Chevy stores. I've probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 stores, and people have wanted them a lot more than I have. So, I've pulled the trigger on a few and sold a few. My little background, though, I started in the car business I said 1990 on my bio, but it's actually 89. So I've been in the business 35 years now. Got out of school, worked at AT&T, couldn't stand being cooped up in the building all day. So I went down the street to this dealership. It was a Lincoln record store. I interviewed. Guy asked me, so how many suits do you own? I said, I own 5 suits. He said, you're hired. Wait a minute. That's not how it's supposed to go. So I didn't take the job, stayed at AT&T, ended up leaving there probably a month later. And I took another opportunity. I looked in the paper, saw a job in Stone Mountain Ford in Atlanta. Went to Stone Mountain Ford in Atlanta, and the same guy who interviewed me at the Lincoln store down the street has moved to the Ford store, as we know we all do, hired me again. So that's how I got into the business. My first dealership was a store that I purchased, which was a direct competition from where I was currently working. And an interesting little story about that is that when I got out of college, I actually went to that store to buy a vehicle. It was a Ford EXP, if you guys know, back in the day. So I get out of college, I go to this store to get a car. I say, oh, you don't qualify. You know, you can't buy a car here. You need to leave. Go on about your business. I was heartbroken. College student, can't buy a Ford EXP. Needless to say, I worked at Stone Mountain Ford for 15 years. When I started as a salesperson, I left there as a general manager. The only reason I left that store was to buy my first store, which was the store that I couldn't buy a Ford EXP at. So, you know, for me, staying the course is what I tell people all the time. You know, just believe in yourself, believe in your abilities, and everything else will work out for you. So that's my little fun facts about me.
One more, please, just for the success story that both of you sharing. Absolutely terrific, and I genuinely feel honored to have both you gentlemen here. So Malcolm, I'm going to come back to you. 35 years, Group 1 Automotive, many years as a new car dealer yourself in ownership. What's your current state? You've seen the cycles. You've seen many of these cycles. What's your current state and your opinion on the state of the buy-sell market?
So I actually like what's happening right now. Obviously, you know, blue sky numbers are coming down, which means there'll be more opportunities for people like you all in the audience to actually purchase their first store, second store, whatever it is. I've been in the market to buy and sell for numerous years. George actually helped me buy a store in Augusta that I know numerous people had passed on. And you know, it was an opportunity for me to get into a second-tier market that ends up, it's actually one of my better stores right now. But as far as the market goes right now, I like what I'm seeing right now just because margins are coming down. Obviously, you know, if you're looking for a deal, you're going to look for the deal where, in most cases, the blue sky is not as large as it normally would be. When I say normal, I mean like in the past 3-4 years. You know, margins were a lot larger. Blue sky numbers were a lot larger. People were paying a lot, you're paying 7 times, 8, 9, 10 times earnings in some cases. Those numbers have come down to, you know, 3-4 times earnings, which are more relevant and which are more easily for what I would say our NAMAD members to absorb and to, you know, basically stomach when it comes down to buying the store. I don't see, in my opinion, I just don't see those numbers changing much over the next few years, which will be a good opportunity for people to go in and, you know, pick up more stores.
Yes.
Which is what everybody's here for.
We certainly don't have a crystal ball or profess to know what the future holds, but we too agree that we've touched on goodwill values softening. The values have come down, not necessarily from pre-pandemic 18-19, but definitely from the peak of the pandemic. And for all practical matters, just reading the tea leaves, seems that it's going to stabilize like this for the near future. Malcolm, thank you. Vikas, shifting to you. Less than 3 years ago, right? December, January 21, less than 3 years ago, you purchased your first dealership, now up to 6. You've been buying dealerships through that curve, that bell curve that Malcolm just mentioned. How are you valuing dealerships today? Let's dive a little bit into valuations.
So I think it's a very subjective question. You know, valuation is very subjective. I think there is 3 things that determine what the value of the store is. One is how bad you want it, right? And you know, how bad the person who wants to sell it. There's different motivations of people why they want to do what they want to do. So, you know, my belief is that if you can afford to buy a store and you know you can make it work and there is somebody to back you up, you just buy it. And that's the way I've done it, right? And I don't know if I will be successful in 20 years. I hope this trend continues, right? But it has worked out. I think a lot of times people who want to pull the trigger, they get caught up in the dollars and cents. Like, it should be a multiple of 4, multiple of 5, and yada, yada, yada. There's no set math to it. It's different markets, different OEMs, the temperatures change. So it's a very subjective question. I think it directly ties to where you are in your journey. And my advice is, if you're ready to pull the trigger, you have somebody to back it up, and you feel that you can make it work, pull the trigger.
Spot on. I love that it is subjective. Oftentimes we hear, but am I overpaying? And we say, overpaying compared to what? Do you have another Ford dealership in your backyard that you can buy today after you just quit your job and you're looking to take a bet on yourself? 20 years from now, you'll never remember whether you over or underpaid for that first dealership.
This is exactly what Jason told me, by the way.
I believe it.
When I was buying Poway, I thought that I was overpaying. I still think I overpaid, but it's okay. And Jason was like, Vikas, in 20 years, when you own 10 stores, you won't even remember what you paid for the first store. And that was one of the that was one of the many good advices that Jason and Jesse, shared with me. And I still want to say again that you guys were more of counselors to me than the brokers. In true sense, you guys guided me through. As a first-time dealer, you don't know what you're walking into. It looks all great from the outside, but as you step into it, it's a different world. But you guys were always there when I pick up the phone and call, and I was losing my stuff, and I was like, I don't want to do this, I can't do this. You'll put me back together. It's like, okay, take a deep breath. We'll talk in 24 hours, and then you walk me through it. So thank you for being the counselor. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the difference of $500,000 20 years from now won't change your life, but the difference of owning the business or not will change your life 20 years from now. Thank you. Malcolm, if you had anything.
No, I was just going to say, the best deal is it's a state of mind.
Exactly.
We say this all the time. If you feel you got a good deal, then you got a good deal. If you don't feel you got a good deal, then you didn't get a good deal. So it's how all you present yourself and how you move into that deal. You're not going to pay the same thing for a Lexus store that you're going to go pay for a Mitsubishi store.
Of course.
Not knocking on any manufacturing like that, but it is a state of mind. Those deals are individual deals, and if you like it, buy it. If you don't like it, back away from it.
Spot on. It really is a mindset. If your valuations come down to your comfort level, your risk aversion or willingness to take risks, or we'll talk about valuations now, parameters and desired return on investment. So let's do it. Let's jump into valuations. Paul and Matt, how are buyers valuing dealerships from your perspective, from your experiences? Remember, this is from the trenches of the buy-sell market with more transactions nationwide than anybody else on the planet, really. How are buyers valuing dealerships post-COVID?
You want me to go first?
Who's got the guts? Who's taking it?
First of all, I will say this. I've been through over 200 buy-sells now, and there's dealers or buyers that are visionaries, and there are dealers that aren't. And clearly, our two guests are visionaries. And it's something I really love when you're dealing with somebody like Vikas. You mentioned, hey, I want to own that asset, and I'm going to figure it out. And I think a lot of buyers do get a little tripped up on, okay, well, let's go find the latest report and see, is a Chevrolet store trading for 4 or 5 times earnings? And the reality is there's way too many things that come into play to try and put a specific number and say, well, it's worth 4 times annual earnings. What happens, we sold a store in 2 stores last year, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. One, if you wanted to use a multiple, traded for 10 times earnings, and the other one was 12, both Metro stores. Does that mean a Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram store is trading for 11 times earnings? Absolutely not. They were running about 20%
Wow.
of their planning volume.
Wow.
So how does a buyer look at it today? Well, a couple of things I would say. I'm finding that buyers are looking at how the store's done through 2024. Yeah. Absolutely relevant, and I can't tell you how many times we have had buyers say, can you send me 2019 financials? Now, back in 2019, nobody was going back 4 years, but they are today. They're going back and saying, what was it doing pre-COVID? Because the reality is, COVID was a blip in the system that if you were a dealer, you really got a lot of enjoyment out of that ride, but the reality is, it's not really relevant to take that high into evaluation today. The other thing I would say they're looking at, are the things they've always looked at, right? They're looking at brand. They're looking at, do they want to live there? Is it an asset that's already in my market that I would like to own? And I think that's a huge point. If it's in a market that you want to live, if it's your first store and it's a place that you'd like to see your family grow up in, it's absolutely worth paying a little extra to own that asset. And I couldn't agree more regarding paying a little bit more today, 20 years from now, you probably won't even remember. And I can tell you with conviction, I bought my store in the 90s, and I know I overpaid probably by hundreds of thousands of dollars at the time, but it doesn't matter today.
Yeah.
The other thing they're looking at would be facility and whether it needs an upgrade or not, and how the facility correlates to how much annual gross income the store can produce. As an NCM moderator in my past life, I will tell you it was something that we looked at regularly. On a domestic, or let's call it a volume franchise, 8 to 10% of all the gross should go off to pay rent. Well, if you've got a really expensive facility, it's probably going to cost some goodwill in that transaction. A lot of buyers are looking at that. And then lastly, well, let's talk about a business plan or a pro forma. History is important of what the store has done, but if it's an underperforming store, what can you as the new buyer, the new dealer do with that store? And clearly our two guests have taken that to heart, and that's the way you look at it.
Well, I think you commented about an underperforming store, and equally as important, of course, is the overperformance during COVID. Naturally, and we all know that. I mean, it will soon be 5 years since we've witnessed the impact that COVID, the pandemic, had on the automotive industry. And I think the crux of the valuation calculation in today's environment is identifying which areas of the business experienced systemic and sustainable growth versus that which was solely attributed to COVID. We are now going back to 18 and 19, and I would say more than ever before, when buyers are building pro formas and building projections, the historical data, it's simply unreliable. It's not irrelevant, but it's unreliable. It's unreliable to look at what happened during the pandemic and say, okay, let's use those same margins. So we find buyers are going back to pre-pandemic to look for specific categories that they can apply over to their pro formas and their projections. And when it comes to valuations, I touched on it just a moment ago, but buyers need, which has always been the case, buyers need to rely on their projections and their pro formas coupled with their desired return on investment and back themselves into an offer that satisfies those buying parameters. And as another example, if you're buying the competitor that wouldn't sell you a car, maybe that's a good motivation for taking them out of business.
Get out of here.
Two quick items that have been, consumer behavior, as we all know, changed with the post-pandemic, and two things that come up often are has the dealership really evolved into being a digital presence? Are you able to buy a vehicle from the couch? Can you buy that vehicle and go from start to finish? Versus before the pandemic, it was you got to come in, you have to go through all the steps of the sale in the dealership. And so we hear that quite often. Technology specialists, we're hearing about that. Are those within your group where you have the ability to call up the dealership and get a tech specialist to help with that backup camera issue or whatever it may be? And then probably number one, post-pandemic, as we all know, during the pandemic, inventory levels were awfully high, and coming off of COVID, what we're finding is we've been involved with several transactions where a dealer is flooded with inventory that's 2-3-year-old new vehicles still in stock, and can create a major problem with blue sky numbers or just the transaction itself. Not only that, inventory mix is extremely important. One example I'd share is if you're a dealer in Des Moines, Iowa, where it's my hometown, having 34 EVs in stock would be very scary in central USA versus maybe being somewhere else. And so for a dealer to come in and buy that store knowing that they're in an EV problem is concerning. And lastly is just, I know Paul mentioned it, but having your real estate all compliant, but also having the EV chargers and all of the assets needed for today's vehicle that's coming off the truck.
Thank you, Matt. Terrific. Vikas, I'm going to come back to you. Let's give us something motivational. Many individuals in this audience may have a lifelong dream of taking that step. Just take us back once more. When you were purchasing your first dealership, any additional valuable words of wisdom, anything you want to share with the audience, please?
Well, I mean, I'll say it again. You got to, pick right partners, right? I mean, you are my partner. So even though you didn't put money in, but we're vested.
Oh, I should.
Yeah, exactly. We're vested. Our interests are similar. So you got to pick a right partner, but most importantly, you got to believe in yourself. I wanted to share this line with you. Life is limitless. So be limitless. I can't tell you to do it. You have to do it. And again, you got to believe in your abilities that you can do it. You're doing it for somebody else. You're doing it for somebody else today. What's the risk of you doing it for yourself? If you fail, I promise you'll find a job. So that's all I want to tell you, that you have to take a leap of faith. It's a risk. It may not work, but you're not going to know if you're not going to try. So I'll say three things. If you have a deal that you think you can put together, don't worry about the valuation. If you think you can make it work with your talent and your team and whatever you've learned during these years in the business, you can make it work. And you have somebody who's backing you up, like financially, I'll say that 10, 15 years ago probably, this space was not as extensive, or I don't think so. I'd be able to, buy these stores, 15 years ago. The landscape has changed. There is a lot of opportunities for you to, find money and have financial partners behind you. So if you can find that third element, just take the chance on yourself. That's it. Again, if you fail, you try again till you make it work.
Thank you, Vikas. Malcolm, same question to you, whether it's on a purchase or a sale. Sincerely, any words of wisdom for aspiring dealers?
So Jamie mentioned earlier that you really need to have relationships with the manufacturers. I've sold several dealerships, probably 6 or 7, maybe 8, and I've sold them through various different channels to get rid of them. One of the things actually the last store I sold to a NAMAD member here. So whereas you want to get to know all of the manufacturers and have relationships with them, you also want to have relationships with your peers here. Get to know the people that you're sitting next to, because you never know what they may be getting ready to dispose of, or how they may feel about their franchise, and maybe a franchise that you love to have. So, make those relationships in here also. The last store that I purchased actually from the manufacturer. So you can utilize any avenue you can to dispose or buy a store, but just make sure you keep your options open. And I think the easiest transaction I did was the transaction I did with George and Performance. It was very seamless. The biggest hurdle in that deal was George actually getting me to come to Augusta to take a look at the store. I'm in Atlanta, and all I kept saying is, I don't want to go to Augusta. I don't want to buy a store in that little bitty city. I'm going to be bored down there, blah, blah, blah. And it's one of my best performing stores right now. It has been one of my best performing stores. So be open to markets that you typically think you wouldn't be open to. But also, just make sure you keep relationships with your NAMAD members here, because those relationships are valuable. So
I absolutely love it. This NAMAD conference, this is a perfect place to prepare. We've shared a lot of valuable information, and a lot of it's centered around preparation. This NAMAD conference, you have here vendors and lenders and industry specialists that are committed to NAMAD, that see the value in the association and are here year after year because they care about your individual success. This is an exceptional place to build your team. Find those people that are going to be invested in your success. From performance standpoint, of course, we would be honored to be part of your journey as well. But keep your options open. Meet the people sitting at your table for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is an exceptional organization that offers so many resources to you. Spot on, Malcolm, thank you. We're going to take it home. One more. Paul, Matt, back on actionable steps to prepare for a purchase. If I'm seriously considering my first purchase, my second purchase, what are tangible things that I can do?
A couple of things. Jamie pointed it out earlier, and that is, how much cash do you have available? And you really need to look at unencumbered funds, meaning not borrowed, cash in a bank, cash in an investment account that you can relieve within 90 days. And be aware that the manufacturer is going to want record of where that money came from 3 months for sure. In some cases, I've heard 4. So just be aware of that. And the other thing I'd piggyback on that happens quite often as a broker talking to a first-time buyer, they will quite often say, hey, I've got an investor. One thing to be careful of when you're out and you're talking to somebody that might be an investor, if they're not in the automotive space now, and if they're not an approvable candidate, the manufacturer is more than likely going to come back and say that they want you as the applicant and the dealer to have 51% controlling interest of the dealership. That's a conversation, if you've got an investor that's not in the industry, to make sure you've had that conversation. The last thing I'd want you to do is go spend a whole ton of money with attorney fees and all those things and get to the altar and get an approval that is not acceptable by your investor. So that's something that I'd point out. The other thing I would say, and we talked a little bit about it, is have your professional team prepared. Make sure that you've got, if you're going to use a broker, and I highly recommend you do, and I highly recommend if you're going to use a broker, vet them out and make sure you feel really good about who they are and how they're going to represent you. But the other 2 factors would be an attorney. And I'd spend a minute talking about an attorney because, quite frankly, it can be a real stumbling block for the transaction if you have an attorney that is not well-versed in M&A in automotive dealerships. Really important that you take some time and you don't just take your regular attorney that you use for other things. You really need somebody that specializes in the industry that really understands it. It can absolutely cost you a ton of money and cost you a deal if it drags on too long. And of course, lastly, CPA, same thing. Make sure you've got somebody that is in the automotive space, knows and understands if you're going to talk to them about value, how to value a store. One thing that we should talk about is banker. You definitely need to make sure that you've got a relationship built in advance for an acquisition loan if you're going to do one, real estate loan if you're going to do one, and of course, floor plan. Matt, I don't know if you got any blanks to fill in.
I think you hit on most of it. The only thing I'd share, and it may come off a little funny, but coming from 25 years in the car business, as Paul says this at times, I'm going to use your words, there's such thing as a real buyer, and then there's a professional shopper. And all I'd say is just as a first-time buyer, make sure you're ready. If you're going to start engaging with brokers, make sure you're actually ready to go forward. Because what can happen, and some of our guests on stage mentioned, they didn't get called back from some brokerage firms. And after a couple of calls of the shopping, you can quickly kind of get deleted from the phone and not be the person to call back because they've shared 15 deals and nothing comes of them. And so just make sure that you are ready, if you're a first-time buyer especially, and you're ready to go. Of course, the competition is thick. There's a lot of buyers out there, big buyers out there, and so if you're a first or second-time buyer, be ready to act when that perfect opportunity comes up. And as Malcolm said, sometimes it's not even in your head a perfect opportunity, but here he is with his best store is probably the one that wasn't the most attractive to him up front. So, and lastly, I couldn't echo this. I actually wrote it down, but take that leap of faith. Don't focus so much on the previous owners or current owners' financials. Think about what you can do when you can go in there and find a dealership that's 25% sales effective, and then you have somebody like Vikas that can go in there and in 6-8 months turn it into multiple 100% sales effective. So valuing it off of the current dealership's performance is a miss at times.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to add, in considering first-time buyers, Vikas, you mentioned that we were your counselor through that, and sometimes there's some psychology in this. It is a big leap of faith. Matt, you used a phrase earlier that I love, and I used it as well. You said, step 0. I love it. We're so quick to get moving, to take action. What do I need to do? Oftentimes I say to buyers, hey, take a step back. What are your goals? What's your why, as they say? What is your motivation for a purchase, and how will a purchase further those goals? That's going to help you in identifying the right opportunity, in building your buying parameters. When I took the first phone call from you, Vikas, I asked you that question, and you might not remember. It was only 3 years ago, but you said something along the lines of, to build a legacy, to build a dealership group for my family. Your son was only 1 year old at the time, I believe. And you said to build it for my family. And as such, staying in Southern California, where you were raising your family, was a critical component to your acquisition. What happened? You found a Ford dealership in Southern California, and I was absolutely moved when I learned that you renamed the dealership Aaron Ford of Poway. And I said, who's Aaron? I only know Vikas. You said Aaron's my son. I want him to have a legacy for years and years to come. That is a perfect example of identifying your motivation, identifying your why, and having the discipline to stick to it. We have 5 minutes left. We are going to race. We have to open it up for some Q&A. We got to get some questions. I need you guys to put these gentlemen on the hot seat a little bit. So is there anybody that would like to ask any questions, anything we didn't cover?
Do you like Augusta now?
I love Augusta now. And no, I'm not a golfer. Haven't been to the Masters. Malcolm, can you give me some tickets? Yes, I'm not going with you, but I can get you some tickets.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Too hot for me.
Well, Miami's too hot for me too, I got to say. Let's get some question. If anybody has a question, perfect, in the center there. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, guys. Great presentation. Really enjoyed, Jesse. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. My name is Fernando Arellano. So my questions, I went through a process. I bought, I would say, almost 22 stores. I have been out from business because of a no-compete for 2 years, so that was great. I have been in holidays for 2 years, coming back starting in September. What I see now in the valuation process, that it's more and more common that the seller in the ad packs, he brings reinsurance.
Yeah.
You know, in my previous life, I used to put an eye always and take it out. I don't buy from reinsurance, and this now sticks there. So what's your opinion about that? Should we consider reinsurance as an ad back, yes or not?
Great question. Excellent question. Paul?
This is one broker's opinion, okay, but I absolutely think that reinsurance is a dealer's own decision. Therefore, I don't use it as an ad back. I don't believe it should be there.
Non-transferable.
Well, if a new dealer decides they want to go ahead and do reinsurance, well, it's a bonus for them. But I really don't see it as an ad back. I just don't.
I happen to agree. Anybody? How are you guys? When you're looking at...
I think it is an ad back because it's real money, and a lot of times, I did reinsurance, that was one of the ways that I was able to buy these stores. And if it wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to buy these stores. But if somebody else, let's say Malcolm, wanted to buy these stores, he probably won't have the need to do reinsurance, but that's still real money. Those will be his profits. They're not going to come back, but I think it's real money. It's just a matter of how you account for it.
Well, so that's what I was going to say is what we've seen is sometimes you apply a different multiple to the reinsurance, perhaps a 1 times multiple or a different multiple than you would apply to the rest of the business as a compromise.
But it's still real profit. At the end of the day, it's real money that you make, you just account it differently.
See, I have a totally different take. I would not consider reinsurance as a part of evaluating the store. You don't know what exactly he's putting into their reinsurance portfolio, so how can you put a value on it when it's his money that he's not going to share with the store? He has no intention on sharing it with the store, so how can you put a value on it? I would not, me personally, I wouldn't put a value on reinsurance.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing, and that is I think it's so important as a buyer to take a look at the history, but then really do your own pro forma, especially if you're an existing car dealer, right? You already know, quite often I'll say to a dealer, okay, let's assume that the store is reasonably sales effective, has a reasonable used car ratio to new car ratio. Now let's take a look at the 6 stores you own. What do you net to gross? What do you net on sales? And then can we duplicate that in this store? And if the answer is yes, now start to work on, well, if you want to look at a multiple of earnings, you could, but a lot of buyers I find are looking at, I want a 20% return on investment or whatever number that is. And I think that becomes really relevant.
Yes.
And I want to add to what Malcolm said here. So I think I want to simplify the reinsurance. There's a way you can do the math for yourself. If a store is selling X number of VSCs and other products, and they have an X dollar of pack, that is something that you can take into, as profit, and then you do your own math. So yes, Malcolm is right that reinsurance can become a little cumbersome, and it could be whatever, but those numbers are on the financial that, year over year, this store has sold X number of VSCs, X number of service, the gaps and alarms and all that, and everything is packed a certain dollar. So it's a simple math equation that you could do, and then you can arrive at a number which you're comfortable with. So that, I think, should be brought back into valuation.
And ladies and gentlemen, exactly why our role exists, why there are gaps between buyers and sellers and the value that we bring.
This wasn't scripted, okay?
This was not scripted at all.
Yeah. We have 1 more minute. Any other question, please?
Yes. How many stores did you look at before you said yes to the first one?
Vikas, how many stores did you look at before you said yes to your first?
I think a safe number is probably about 10. It's interesting. Poway, I was looking at Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram. We said no to it. And Jason insisted go and look at the store in Poway. I said, no, I'm not going to go from Orange County to in middle of nowhere in Poway. I'm not going to do it. For 2 months, he's like, Vikas, you just got to check the store. And that's why sometimes you just have to believe and trust in your partners. And Jason and Jesse and their dad, they're my partners for life. And any deal I do, even if they're not involved, my first call is to them, just to ask. That's how much I trust them. Even if I get a call from another broker, my first call is to them, like, what do you think? And you've always been kind and given me unbiased, advice, and that's how we did it. So when I look at the store, it was beautiful, image compliant, within my price range, even though we were paying a little too much. And then I just took a leap of faith and trusted Jason and Jesse, and that's how it all started.
And we are right out of time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Please, one more round of applause for our guest speakers.
Thank you very much, Jesse Stopnitsky and the Performance Brokerage.